Hello and welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In today's video, the Up and Up series returns, and today we are going to update and upgrade our Xenagos God of Revels EDH deck. What is going on, MTG BC? You are the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to another installment of the Up and Up series. This time, Xenagos God of Revels gets its chance to become updated and upgraded. And of course, Xenagos is one of the decks that resides in the Burgeoning Commander catalog, which is the BCC, a playlist of decks that is available on our MTG Burgeoning channel. In addition, you can click the link in the description below to see the current deck list of this Gruul build. So we've got some changes afoot here for Xenagos, and we're going to take a moment here to allow Xenagos to meet his new best friend, a complete game ender when paired with Xenagos' combat trigger, and what may end up becoming one of, if not the most powerful red creature in Magic's history. Xenagos, let me introduce you to Bloodthirster. We have a 6/6 flying trampling demon for 5 and 1 red, which curves wonderfully right after casting our own General Xenagos, which is 3 and Gruul colors. Whenever Bloodthirster deals combat damage to a player, we get to untap it, and after this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. Bloodthirster cannot attack a player it has already attacked this turn. The synergies and the interaction with Xenagos and Bloodthirster will be game-ending if we can just get them both onto the battlefield at the same time. At the beginning of each of these combats, Xenagos' combat ability is going to trigger. We're going to target Bloodthirster, giving it haste, but more importantly, giving it the +X/+X, which is going to be equal to its power. So each time that Bloodthirster attacks, it's going to get that boost from Xenagos during each one of those combats. So combat number 1, it's a 12/12 flying trampler. We untap it. Combat 2, it's a 24/24 flying trampler. We untap it, and after that, if we have a third opponent, that opponent goes bye-bye because it's now a 48/48 flying trampler. And if we have a fourth opponent, you got it, 96/96 flying trampler. Boy, oh boy, Bloodthirster is just an absolutely amazing addition to this deck. Xenagos has a new best friend in this mono-red demon. So Bloodthirster is going to come in, and we need to find something to replace it. We need to find a card in the 99 for Bloodthirster to replace. So we decided to try to keep it as close to possible with respect to mana value, with respect to the abilities on the card, and we came up with the following choice. It's the same mana value of 6, but instead of it being 5 and a red, it's 4 and 2 red. They both have flying, they both have trample, but Bloodthirster's ability is much more game-ending than Hellkite Tyrant has ever been for me in this deck. So with all of those stats in mind, the only difference is that Hellkite Tyrant was a 6/5, while Bloodthirster is a 6/6. In Hellkite Tyrant, whenever it dealt combat damage to a player, we gain control of all artifacts that player controls. If we have at least 20 or more artifacts at the beginning of our upkeep, we win the game. For all the years, the many, many years that I've had this Xenagos deck, I have never been able to win the game by utilizing Hellkite Tyrant's ability. Yes, there are some synergies between this and the Ancient Copper Dragon if we were able to pair them up onto the battlefield simultaneously. However, for the purposes of this build, in a vacuum, Bloodthirster is going to do so much more for this deck in conjunction with Xenagos than Hellkite Tyrant ever has. That's why the swap is happening. The Tyrant is coming out, Bloodthirster is going in, and honestly, it's not really even that close of a decision. All right, so the next creature going in, it's an interesting addition here. It's not really a banger of a creature when you first look at it, but when you consider what this deck is and what it does, Xenagos is a beatdown deck. We want to get a creature into play, we want to jack them up, we want to send it into combat, and we want to beat down our opponents. Invariably, we're going to see those biggins fall. They're going to get killed. They're going to go to the graveyard. And once in the graveyard, I mean, we are in green, so we do have the ability to have some recursion. But with so many biggins in the graveyard, there has to be a better, quicker, more efficient way that we can utilize them. We can utilize those fallen bodies by adding Redemptor Dreadnought. Now here we have an artifact creature. It's 4/4. It's 5 generic mana. It does have trample. That trample is very, very important. There are very, very few creatures in the 99 of this build that do not have evasion. And if they don't have evasion, they need to have an ability that's so powerful that it hedges against the fact that it can just get chump blocked when Xenagos sends it into combat. So what do we have here with Redemptor Dreadnought? Well, as an additional cost to cast it, we may exile a creature card from our graveyard. And then, whenever Redemptive Dreadnought attacks, if we did choose to exile a creature card when we cast it, it'll get +X till end of turn, where X is the power of the exiled card. So think of it like this. If we cast Redemptor Dreadnought and we exile Bloodthirster from the graveyard, because let's face it, that's going to be a lightning rod for attention. We may now want to choose Bloodthirster because that might be one of the cards we want to get back into our hand. But this is just an example for this particular scenario with respect to the interaction with Redemptor Dreadnought. So we exile the Bloodthirster, so then we decide to attack. So whenever we decide to attack, we're going to get that power boost on top of Xenagos' combat ability. Now, if we shift over here to the left a little bit, it's at the beginning of combat that Xenagos' ability triggers. So we'll give him a +4/+4, which is going to make him an 8/8 trampler. Then when we declare him as an attacker and turn him sideways, he's going to get an additional +6/+6 in the form of the Bloodthirster's power. So what we're looking at here is a 14/14 trampler in conjunction with Xenagos, and that's all for the investment of just 5 generic mana. Here we're utilizing our falling biggins from the graveyard as a way in which to still exact vengeance against our opponents, even in their demise. I'm looking forward to seeing how Redemptor Dreadnought synergizes with this deck. More on that in the future. So, since we're trying to get a little bit more of graveyard synergies here with respect to our fallen brethren, it only makes sense that we exchange one graveyard-specific spell for another. And with that in mind, Redemptor Dreadnought's going to go in, and it's going to replace Reap the Past. This card, in its history, for as long as it's been in this build, has had a very middling effect and impact when cast. I'm looking forward to seeing if Redemptor Dreadnought has a bigger impact on the game than anything Reap the Past has ever done. I mean, getting cards back from the graveyard into our hand is a beneficial thing. If we have enough mana, we can just get our entire graveyard, but that seldom is the case, and sometimes investing the mana into this due to the randomization of the cards that come back to our hand is just not worth it. Plus, this is just a one-and-done effect. Once we cast it, we exile it. And we do have ways to get Redemptor Dreadnought out of our graveyard and back into our hand, meaning that we can utilize the creatures in our graveyard that are still there more than once because we can get the Dreadnought back into our hand. So what this comes down to is utilizing our graveyard more efficiently through exiling biggins than potentially getting them back into our hand through the randomization of Reap the Past. All right, next card going in. It's going to have a massive impact on us casting our biggins, and it's going to have a very cumulative impact against our opponents and how many times they cast non-creature spells. That card is an enchantment called Shadow in the Warp. It's 1 in Gruul colors. The first creature spell we cast each turn costs 2 generic mana less to cast. Like we needed to get any quicker by getting biggins on our side of the battlefield for Xenagos to target. And as an additional bonus, whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, Shadow in the Warp deals 2 damage to that player. So notice that it says each turn, so if they're casting instants on one of their opponent's turns, well, guess what? Shadow of the Warp is going to shock that player for 2, and that damage is going to add up awfully quickly because let's face it, not everybody is all about playing a Rurik Thar-like deck. There are non-creature spells all over the place in our format, and Shadow in the Warp is going to make our opponents pay for casting them. That going into play is going to be, that going into the 99 is going to have a greater impact on the game than one of the removal spells that we're going to take out. Now, we're in Gruul colors, so, we do have the ability to have, some versatile removal in this deck, and we do. We definitely have our own personalized removal suite. So in choosing a removal spell to take out, what we decided to do is to try to identify the removal spells that would hurt us the most by casting them and target that for removal. And that's most likely going to be one of the board wipes, one of our sorcery speed board wipes. So with Blasphemous Act just being way too good to ever come out, that's just not ever going to happen. It came down to taking out Star of Extinction. We got sorcery speed here. It's 5 and 2 red, so it's not a cheap mass removal spell. There we go. And we get to destroy target land, and this deals 20 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. That should most likely wipe the entire board of all creatures, and all planeswalkers, of course, outside of any protection or indestructibility. Why this is not as valuable to us as Blasphemous Act is, let's face it, Xenagos should be able to make many of our creatures have toughnesses higher than 13. By keeping Blasphemous Act in, we could still cast that after combat during our post-combat main phase and have that creature still be on the battlefield while watching most likely every other creature fall right into their graveyard, right into their controller's graveyard. So the 20 damage, however, there's going to be very few times that our creature is going to survive this removal spell. So that was one of the other thought processes in replacing Star of Extinction with Shadow in the Warp. The versatility of what the enchantment gives us by reducing the mana costs of our creatures, the peripheral direct damage that's being dealt, overall is going to help us more than this mass removal spell could. All right, next card coming in, and a card that really you can anticipate and really should expect to see in every single deck that has green that has a creature theme. And that's going to be Monster Manual. Here we have a artifact and a sorcery stapled onto one card. So yes, we can cast the sorcery first and then cast the artifact later. So let's talk about the sorcery, our adventure called Zoological Study. We pay 2 and a green, we can mill 5 cards, then we can return a creature card milled this way to our hand. So it's awfully reasonable to think that of those 5 cards, at least one of them is going to be a creature. That seems very reasonable, especially because of the number of creatures that are in this deck. The odds are in our favor that we'll get at least one, and maybe if we're lucky, we get to pick one of the creatures. So that's the sorcery part of this card. The much more valuable part for us is if we cast it for its artifact side. 3 and a green, it goes into play, and it becomes a Quicksilver Amulet. Now, Quicksilver Amulet is an artifact that has no colors. It's a generic mana value of 4, which is the same mana value as Monster Manual. Its activation is also 4. Here, its activation cost is just 1 and a green. So we're saving 50% on our mana invested in activating this Quicksilver Amulet-like artifact. And when we do, and we tap it, we put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. This helps us to get our biggins into play quicker, getting it lined up with Xenagos much quicker as well, and then we can send them into combat and beat down our opponents and move on to the next game. Monster Manual in any green deck with creatures should be one of the first cards thought to be included. And in addition, any deck that plays green that was playing with Quicksilver Amulet Well, I really don't understand. You need to replace that with Monster Manual. Monster Manual does everything that Quicksilver Amulet does, but it does it even better. And you can line up in conjunction on the same turn, getting a creature from the milling part of the zoological study, and then putting it into play with the Monster Manual. And if Xenagos is on your side of the battlefield, depending on what creature that is, oh baby, the fireworks could be deafening. Alright, so that does it for most of the spells. We're going to do some upgrades to our mana base. First, what we're going to do is we're going to take out one basic forest and one basic mountain. And we're doing that because we have the ability, or should I say the availability, of putting in some lands that can give us either one of those two colors. And if we can do that, then we want to make sure that we do so as a way in which to never be hamstrung from mana fixing, as a way to not be able to cast our spells. So, with the mountain coming out and the forest coming out, the two replacements are Karplusan Forest. This is our Gruul Pain land. We can tap, turn it sideways for a colorless mana, or we can tap it for a red or a green mana and take 1 point of damage. Either way, we have the option, and it is a much more versatile spell than the mountain or the forest by themselves. And previously, this card was purposely left out just based upon availability. When this deck's land base was first constructed, a copy of this card was just not available. However, that is no longer the case. Thanks to its reprinting in Battle for Baldur's Gate, now we have the ability to be a little fast and loose with Reflecting Pool. Generally, I would keep this card out of 2-color decks just because it's much more valuable in 3, 4, and 5-color builds. But thanks to its reprinting in Battle for Baldur's Gate, this is like, you get a Reflecting Pool, and you get a Reflecting Pool. Everybody gets a Reflecting Pool. So Reflecting Pool is going to come in, and it's going to give us a red or a green mana as long as we have lands that produce those colors, and we absolutely should. So when we look at it from a different standpoint, Reflecting Pool is going to act like Command Tower 2.0. And now, just for the purposes of clarity, removing the mountain and the forest, those two basic lands from the 99 of this build, will not hamper the land ramp spells already included in the 99. We still have far many more basics than we could ever cheat out onto the battlefield through Kodama's Reach and Cultivate and other effects like that. So no worries there. We're keeping a close eye on that land base. All right, we've got one more change here, one more upgrade. One more way to get even quicker in our colors. Get Xenagos out into play even quicker. Get our creatures out into play faster. Let them line up with Xenagos. Turn them sideways and beat them down. What's going in? Well, it's going to be Mana Crypt. Everybody knows the story of this card. It's 0 to cast. We tap it for 2 colorless mana. And if your coin flipping skills are anything like mine, you can expect to take a lot of damage. Luckily for us, we have a very, very fast Gruul Xenagos deck here, so we will make sure that our opponent's life totals stay well further south than our own. Mana Crypt is going in, and it's going to take the spot of Temple of the False God. This is a Mana Crypt-like ability of giving us 2 colorless mana without the fear of taking any damage. However, we can't even use this until we control at least 5 lands. So seeing this card in our opening hand is almost enough of a motivating factor to say, let's take a mulligan. Well, that is no longer the case because Mana Crypt is going to come in and do Temple of the False God's job better than Temple of the False God's job was ever done. All right, and with that fairly jumbled way in which to close out this video, those are the changes here in our Xenagos God of Revels deck. Let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.